We just had another playtest for 10.4, which I think is coming pretty soon, and this is going to update gunplay, stamina, and some other elements of squad, so we should discuss it. But first, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with any of your thoughts, especially if you are part of the playtest. And of course, if you or a friend needs a copy of Squad, you can use my code SLAY3K30 at the link in the description below for 30% off. Now, the last video I did featuring the playtest, I talked a lot about the bugs I'm witnessing, and some of these things are still existent in the playtest. For example, the explosions still looking like Play-Doh, textures not rendering in like they should. But you know what's not a bug anymore? It's being able to hear the map sound. That's pretty cool, but I don't think this is going to stay. It kind of doesn't even make sense because we're not pulling out a paper map, but it's kind of funny. So I've cleared my cache, I've verified game files to try to reduce whatever bugs I might be running into. The first thing I want to discuss is stamina and how it's changing. And where you're going to see, I think the most notable change in stamina is running. For folks that have been playing a lot recently, you're probably going to notice that the stamina bar is not going down as quickly as we're accustomed to. And this is something I'm pleased about because I do think we need the ability to cross terrain a little bit quicker. But to get a better idea of how significant the change is, let's take a look at a comparison between the playtest and live game. So here you're going to see a side-by-side along with the stamina bars for each. On the right is the live version of the game, and you can see that I'm depleting stamina much quicker. And I make it to the wall here, obviously faster in the playtest because I do have more stamina before I'm hitting the red in the live game, which I never hit in the playtest. Now in this, I'm not seeing a significant change in stamina regeneration, but we'll take a look at that more closely in a moment. But because I didn't use as much stamina, I'm regaining the stamina. I'm filling the stamina in the playtest much quicker. And to give you better context, that's about an 85-meter run, give or take a little bit. So I did some other super scientific tests. For example, jumping over a half wall, I don't see a significant difference in the stamina consumption. And if there is a difference, it just doesn't seem that noticeable. Even for a full wall mantle, I didn't see a significant difference in the stamina consumption. So I don't think that there's much changed here, or at least not anything significant. So I think some of your parkour will remain pretty much the same. So let's take a look at stamina regeneration. And this is the most scientific thing I could do is jump and see how quickly it returns to full. And I don't see anything that significant between live or the playtest that would suggest that that's changed. And I also went ahead and did a version of this crouch to see if maybe there was an adjustment when you were crouched. But I'm not seeing anything here that suggests that there's a significant adjustment to how stamina regenerates between live and playtest while in crouch after expending all of your stamina. And I want to take a look at this because sometimes you hear about adjustments or people are talking about adjustments being made, and sometimes there are and sometimes there aren't. So in summary, it seems like the only adjustment I have been able to detect in stamina is really tied to running. Now I can see how some folks may not think this is very significant, but I do think it is a good step in a good direction in terms of helping to improve movement. Because there's been a couple things that have happened in previous updates that I think have affected the game, and I've talked about this before. We have a reduction in logies. We used to always have 3 logies when it was just your combined arms force. Now there's times where you have 2, or maybe they're armored attract logies that just don't have the same mobility. So that puts more emphasis on keeping those logistics vehicles alive when you only have 2 at rollout. And throughout the round, you're very careful about how you utilize those. And simultaneously, vehicles are louder in game. You can be heard from further away if you're trying to put a radio down. So that has affected the distance at which people are setting up fobs and putting down rallies. So hopefully less stamina consumption can improve the ability for soldiers to go from a rally or wherever their starting point is to wherever they're trying to get to go a little bit more efficiently. Now let's hop over to gunplay. I don't know how much really changed with gunplay. I took a look at some of the same things that I looked at before. And this is one of the things that people have talked about the most is where is your gun landing when you first go to ADS? So I took a few comparisons here between playtest and live. And of course, when you go to ADS, both of them have a slight adjustment before they get center point. Now to be clear, I'm not pressing anything to stabilize my accuracy or anything like that. I'm just trying to see the motion of the scope coming up and where it lands. It kind of feels like the playtest has a little bit more randomization of the movement and a little bit more movement speed before it settles. But one thing you can tell from this, especially in the slowed down clips, is that the ADS in the playtest is indeed faster. But there does seem to be a difference in how the playtest finally settles on its target versus the live version. This has been something a lot of folks have talked about, like your center of your screen is not aligning where the reticle is supposed to be and it's throwing people off. Now, if I do the movement that I did in my last video where we go side to side, you'll see kind of the same differences that we saw before, where the playtest scope is veering a little bit further away more consistently than the live version. Again, I'm not a scientist. I don't always look at the stuff this closely, but I've just been curious about how to see some of the differences. Now, to be clear, they both have a little bit of a floating thing that happens where they kind of go off center point, but it seems to happen more frequently in the playtest and more drastically. Realistically, I guess it makes sense for this not to always be lined up, but it's a question of how far off should it ever be. If you're coming around a corner and you're trying to peek, this is where you would see this kind of be an issue. If someone else is doing the same thing and just by chance they have a headshot while you have an arm shot, that's going to affect how that fight plays out. Now, typically in the live version of Squad, I've talked about fighting against a mechanic that often felt slow. For example, the most noticeable thing was just ADSing, which feels much faster in the playtest. I also don't think I'm seeing as much of the interior barrel of the magnified scopes either, but that may just be me. But something about the ADS and the sway combination, it just feels odd to me and I can't quite figure out what it is still. There's a couple times in this playtest where I found myself like holding ADS, looking at a target, I had a clear shot and I'm just waiting an extra moment just to make sure nothing weird happens. There's an aspect of that experience that feels like I'm so trying to make sure I hit the shot because I'm trying to account for the variables in the gunplay that I'm really just hyper focused and hyper aware of that, which goes into recoil. I don't necessarily feel confident in how the gun is going to come back onto the target because I'm seeing sway beforehand, during and after I fired a shot. And one could make the argument that I haven't used the new mechanics enough to have great familiarity with it compared to what's in the live version. I think how I described it last time was that it felt like it was floating or drifting a little bit, especially vertically. So these examples I'm showing now are without stabilization, with stabilization, and with stabilization, but I'm not adjusting for the recoil immediately. I'm just trying to see where my second shot might land if I don't adjust. Now, as it pertains to recoil, I do know a bunch of folks took part in a poll that was posted in the Playtest Discord, and the overwhelming majority selected better when a comparison was made between the recoil in the live version of Squad versus the playtest. Now, I know many folks said this, and it does feel like an oversimplification of recoil and trying to judge whether recoil is improving or not improving based on live versus playtest. Additionally, one could argue that it's missing additional variables like suppression or a new form of suppression because we're still using the live version of suppression even in the playtest, which still feels overpowering. But one thing I would love to see an oversimplification on might just be gunplay in the game at this point. Something I kept seeing out of the corner of my eye whenever at ADS is just how many frames I'd lose. And this is not a new thing. This has always been the case since picture-in-picture scopes were introduced. But now I'm just beginning to wonder how much picture-in-picture scopes are actually maybe getting in the way of progress in gunplay. How much are picture-in-picture scopes now just overcomplicating this thing? And on top of that, we're also losing performance when we go to ADS. And I say this in the context of we are 7 or 8 months after the release of Unreal 5 for Squad, and we're still seeing a pretty significant performance drop-off when it comes to ADSing with magnified scopes. I mean, I know people still to this day that aren't even using magnified scopes because the performance is problematic for them. Now, I do realize it's not a simple thing just to remove, but I do wonder how much more difficult it is to make these changes to gunplay and how that might be affecting the progress. There's a lot of variables in gunplay alone, and this is still a significant update on the horizon, and I don't even have much to say about the Unreal 5.7 update because I don't really know what it does, especially in the context of what technology they may be using specifically within Squad. I think finally, the one thing I would add to this is just trying to find what the direction is moving forward. I still feel like we're in a little bit of a fix-it mode with still a lot of things that need to be fixed. And honestly, it kind of seems like we're hitting that point where the team wants to push this into live and get it out there, hopefully to make continued adjustments, maybe get suppression updated, but also start working on whatever the next thing is. Because like I talked about in the last video, we've used up a lot of the stuff in the roadmap. There's still these key things that remain. But beyond that, I'm not really sure what is next. I think in the absence right now of some of the communications we've become accustomed to more recently, we do need some form of direction in terms of where the game is headed beyond just the gunplay updates. And that's largely because the last 4 or 5 months we've focused on fixes, gunplay, and now 5.7. And of course, in the times that we live in, it's really important for game developers to continue to give direction and ideas for where the game is headed, especially when it comes to content. With all of that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it made some form of sense and wasn't just me ranting again. But thank you so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button down below so you can be informed on the next video. Leave a like and drop a comment with your thoughts on the playtest, and I hope to see you all next time.